each other right here.
Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Munson Steed, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. This is where we find out where all the power is coming from. This is where we get insights on power, and we give you access to executives, access to community leaders, access to change agents who are making a difference in our community, giving us information on how we can empower ourselves, change our culture in a positive way, and get some insights on what we might not know, and share this data with us so that you and I can move forward with our seat at the table. Today, we are joined by a phenomenal executive at Nielsen. She is truly a representative of our community. She has been in the halls of power. She has definitely represented the community in a way that shares insight. She is also a caretaker of the images of our community as it relates to data and bytes and information so that we can really know. If you haven't been in her presence, you should. If you've listened or heard her speak, whether it's across the country, there's not an executive group in our community that she has not stood in front of, sponsored, and suggested to us to take control of our power and understand it. I'm speaking of none other than Miss Cheryl Grace. How are you?
Hi, Munson. I'm doing well. How are you?
Well, you know, it's a beautiful time here at the seat at the table because we've got executives like you who can tell us the truth, give us insight on where we are as a community, where we are as a country, which is a real challenge for us to understand the data and to understand how this country is changing and moving. And there's obviously a movement. You've got a 10-year report. So we really want to know and get some insight on where it is and where executives like yourselves find yourself in the midst of this data and exchange that is happening to empower our community and to understand what this data says about us.
Well, I want to say, first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for having Nielsen on. It is indeed the release of the 10th annual report on the state of the African American community, the African American consumer. We're calling this year's report the Black community, from the power of the Black community, from moment to movement. And there's a lot that's happened in the last 10 years. There's a lot that's happened in the last 9 months. And what we do is we take a really comprehensive look at where things were back in 2011 when we did the very first report and where things stand now. And the number one thing that I think is important is the fact that the Black consumer population's buying power has increased by 48% since we did the first report. And right now, today, it's standing at $1.4 trillion. That's nothing to sneeze at.
Right. When you say that, most people have no idea because we don't get $1 trillion in our bank accounts often. And so understanding harnessing that power. The other thing is, and I think the report, what does it mean that consumer companies are actually spending against that number? How do we see them spending against that number? And how important is it? Can you kind of give us some insight on what we know about that?
Yeah, so what we know is where we're spending our time and where we're spending our money. And that's what the reports have historically broken out over the course of the last 10 years. And we know that we've been reporting since day one that the Black community is a voracious, they consume voracious amounts of content. The content over the years has changed. And so we were just doing some banter before you and I started this, and someone talked about Gilligan's Island and how, you know, we grew up watching that as kids. And well, now, while Gilligan's Island was what we watched because we didn't have a choice, what we have found over the course of the last 10 years, is that African Americans have more choices in what they're watching on television. A lot of that has happened during the last 10 years. And, you know, some of it is from the Shonda Rhimes school of, if you produce it, they will come. And as a result of that, we've seen a lot of shows emerge on broadcast networks. We've seen a lot of shows emerge on cable networks. And now we're seeing a lot of shows emerge on the other platforms, the streaming devices that weren't inclusive or as diverse 10 years ago. And so now you have shows from Empire to shows on, and I'm trying to read some of these. So shows from Empire to the cable shows like American Dad, that Blacks see that they have an opportunity to watch diverse characters across the globe. And it's really very important to understand that that content diversity is as important as the fact that Blacks are watching so much content.
And just thinking about that content, it creates a new dynamic in the marketplace. So obviously characters will be speaking in a different way. We will see different leading people, and it will create dialogue amongst our community. In seeing that, what do you think this is saying to the next generation of African Americans about what their expectations should be about television, media, and the movement?
What it really sends is a message that, again, I kind of mentioned it when I talked about the Shonda Rhimes phenomenon. If you produce it, they will come. If we have content that speaks to us in our multidimensionality, we will watch it. And it's important for us to put our time and our effort and our money where our mouths are. And so for younger generations coming up, the reason that you have so much diversity in content right now across all of these video platforms, as fragmented as they are, you have these choices because we have had people out there working really, really hard to develop content that is worthy of who you are as an African American and how you show up in the world. And we should be showing up in positive roles and not just, being shown in some of the negative stereotypical roles that years before, we had no choice but to play. So this says to me that you as a young person understand your power and that every decision that you make, from what you watch on television to what you buy in a grocery store, has impact from a collective perspective.
Yeah, I like that. But there is also the new challenge of the Ava DuVernays, the advent of Netflix as an option. So you've got a platform that clearly has identified that they are focused, or they are funding, they are going to respect from their executive. When you see a CEO like Reed Hastings actually make a donation of $140 million as a CEO, pick a African-American CMO, and she's a female, and then commit to actually making content that speaks to our community. So when you think of Ava, you think of Chandra, and you think of the 13th Amendment, that is content that is very cause-based. How and what should this say to all leadership about how we think of ourselves as it relates to content in media?
So content and media and choices. And we launched yesterday the new brand for the consumer division of Nielsen called Nielsen IQ. And as part of that launch, we had a conference that included Magic Johnson as the keynote spokesperson. And Magic talked about valuing diversity when it comes to consumers, particularly consumers in urban areas where for so many reasons and for so many years, this consumer segment was discounted. And he walked in and proved that, yes, you could open up a Starbucks in a Black community and that it would outperform all other Starbucks. The same with the movie industry. And so what that says is that when you put your money where your mouth is and align it with your business strategies, and that it is in alignment with your business strategies, that the African American or multicultural consumer or urban consumer absolutely can deliver on that bottom line. We just need to make sure that we believe it, as well as the businesses who are going to ultimately capitalize on the belief. They're believing it. We need to believe it too as consumers.
So when you think about the success of Black brands and Black-owned businesses, what's the report giving us insight on as it relates to this phenomenon?
So we've seen Black businesses increase, of course, over the last 10 years. We've shown that. We're also showing that African Americans are now 58% more likely to expect the brands that they buy to take a social stance, and 37% more likely to buy a brand when they do take a social stance. We're seeing that Black businesses have while a lot of Black businesses have suffered during the last 9 months because of COVID and because of the social unrest, we've also seen brands that have shown improvement. So there's been a 78% increase year over year in July for the Michelle Foods syrup brand, Michelle Syrup, when the Mrs. Butterworth and Aunt Jemima brands were under attack for not really being brands that are produced by African Americans. Michelle's Foods is an African American company, and as a result, she's shown an increase. Flowers Communications Group has also shown an increase in business over the course of the last 3 or 4 months, simply because of the demand that has come out of everything that's happened in 2020. There's been so many things that have happened in 2020. You know, when we look back on 2020, it's going to be like the year of 1969 that previous generations were looking at. It is a watershed year. It's a watershed moment, and some businesses are doing much better as a result of that. The radio industry, more than a third of African Americans report that they were spending more time with radio as a result of COVID. So there are some things that have happened from a CPG space as well as a media space during these last 9 or 10 months that have had a positive impact on the economy and on communities of color.
Audio, podcast, radio, what do we see? I mean, it is new.
I'm sorry?
I said it's new, it's central to moving our community forward. How does that play a role? What should people know that this report is saying about podcasts, period, in our relationship to audio?
Podcasting, didn't really exist 10 years ago, or it was just at the very early stages of it. And yet what we're seeing is, from a podcast perspective, that comedy, music, news, and education are the top 3 areas, along with business, are the top 4 genres that are popular among Black podcast listeners. That 45% of audiences that are listening to podcasts who are Black saying that they're tuning into comedy. 38% are tuning into podcasts for music, 35% for news. Religion and spirituality are also very important to us, and we over-index in that particular genre by 30%. So podcasting is another way that we feel that we have a voice that's not necessarily monitored, because podcasting, you don't have to worry about producers who are going to tell you what you can and cannot say. You pick up a pair of earphones and a microphone, and you can be you. And that authenticity is really very important to the African American community. And that's how why you're seeing rather the increase in podcasts.
We're number 1 ethnic group, it says, for watching and playing games and consoles. What should that say to advertisers?
Well, what it should say, what it does say are 2 different things. So Munson, you own a company, you have to be out there hustling every day to attract advertisers. And we know that the consumption habits and behaviors that we have as a Black community say and point to the fact that we should be having a much higher percentage of support from advertisers. I suspect if I were to ask you if that's the case, if what you are experiencing from an advertisement perspective in selling ads is in sync with the number of viewers that you have, readers that you have. And that's pretty much showing out in other media that's focused on African Americans as well. We're showing that there has been an increase on the amount of advertising dollars that have been spent with media focused on African Americans. And I can't say Black-owned media because there's a difference, because we don't have as many Black-owned media entities as we had 10 years ago. But media that is focused on, 51% or more of African Americans as an audience, we've seen a 16% increase in spend. However, despite that 16% increase in spend, the advertising spend is still only 2% of all advertising spend that's the advertisers are spending their dollars on. So we're only getting 2% of that. And we're, 14% of the population, and we're watching, more television, listening to more radio and reading more magazines, but it doesn't align.
Now, I think the point is so clear. I'm not sure that people have in our community and understand that it really leads to unemployment. Like, you've got individuals that are employed off our dollars and off our backs. And we are truly the receipt shareholders. So that 2% is horrible, and it leads to unemployment. And our young people literally could be copywriters. So I think that that's a number that we really need to address in a movement. It also says to me, as I read that number, and I appreciate you providing that number to us, that we as a community really need to use these numbers to empower ourselves to speak more pointedly to corporations that have zero as it relates, particularly because you can't grow your business when someone is not doing business with you, but they're saying that they're doing business with Black people and they're doing it with others. So I think I want to say at least thank you for that note, because it really points to that. But it also says that there might not still be a community leadership commitment in America to really recognize. But I also think that this will empower us to be able to have more pointed conversations. What do you see when you think about the responsibility that Hollywood has to this?
So Hollywood has shifted. Certainly we've seen increasing inclusion on television. Nielsen has a new way of measuring what the inclusivity looks like from a perspective when you're looking at how Black women and Black men are showing up on screen. And we have a way of highlighting and capturing on that. I think also that taking a look, and we talked about this earlier, about the top shows that are appearing on across those platforms. So listen, when you take a look at broadcast and the fact that Empire and The Masked Singer and For Life and 9/11 and How to Get Away with Murder, Chicago PD, Grey's Anatomy, The Neighborhood, Chicago Fire, and This Is Us were the top 10 shows that were aired between December of 2019 and September of this year on broadcast, and that on cable it's Last Dance and Sister Series and Love and Hip Hop Atlanta and House of Pain and Love and Hip Hop again in Miami and the Black Ink Crew and The Oval, Remembering George Floyd, Assisted Living, and T.I. and Tiny Family Hustles, season 3. When you take a look at what the offerings are, those weren't there 10 years ago. So the fact is that Hollywood has had a reckoning, if you will, and they understand that there is value in brown and Black eyeballs, and it equates to green. And so thus I'm wearing the color green today.
I think that's a great conversation, but in places that it's not being recognized, in brands and media companies that are not coming forward with content that is diverse, what is it saying about them, and what does it say about leadership? Because much of this is starts at the top, comes down. The level of communication about what's good. So by omitting that, what are they losing? And then what is our community losing by them not being diverse?
Anytime you're leaving money on the table, that's never a good thing for your brand. And if you don't have a strategy that is inclusive of multicultural consumers, considering that 92% of the growth in the US population is coming from multicultural consumers, you don't really have a growth strategy. And that's what I would share, that is really very important for brands to understand, that you have to have that strategy in place, and you have to include people at the table who are going to tell you what you need to hear and not just what you want to hear.
And for just following that question up again, the very evolution of the omission of Black female CEOs in the Fortune 500. Hard to make a movie of something that doesn't exist. What does this say about their respect for, and you don't have to say or not, but for Black women actually ascending to the top of these corporations when you have zero at the top and we're at the seat of the table just thinking you're a Black exec, top of a Fortune 500 company. Why are Black women omitted?
I can't tell you why we're omitted. I can tell you what it feels like to be omitted, and I think and hope that that is rapidly changing. But you're right, we can't write stories. Well, we can write stories about that which we don't see. It's called the imagination. But hopefully, we won't continue to lean into our imaginations about female CEOs. And we have had CEOs over. When you look at the Hughes, Kathy Hughes, and Oprah, and see how successfully they have managed their media brands and grown the businesses. And what Deborah Lee did over at BET and how she grew that. Black women deserve to be in positions of power, and I think and hope and pray that all of the social unrest that we've seen over the course of the last 9 or so months, we're starting to see that that is a trajectory that we're going to be on, that's not going to be a moment, but a movement.
Right. I like that you talked about movement, because I think movement is so important for our society when we think about we're paying for our society to move forward. And in some areas, we're still not moving forward fast enough. When you think about the report, what is it saying about the Black family? What are we doing? The caretakers, the caregivers, particularly in COVID. I've said a million times to any Black mother, you are doing everything plus grow arms or legs to do more than your share.
Yeah, we talked in the report, and I'm looking at it now, that Black workers make up about 1 in 9 workers overall, but about 1 in 6 are frontline industry workers. So, we're getting up and we're still going to work, regardless of the fact that there is a raging disease out there, and that I could bring it home with me. We're still going to work. We know that grandparents are living in our households. So we've got multi-generational households, and some of that includes making sure that we're passing down legacies of beliefs and on brands, and whether it's what kind of green beans you choose, because grandma's in the house. If grandma's always had a particular brand of green beans that is used, and doggone it, as long as granny's in the house, we're going to be using that brand of green beans. So it has an impact from a cultural perspective that not all households are blessed to have.
Yeah, it saddens me that many still can't work from home. They are frontline workers. They are caretakers at the same time. So they're trying to figure out how to juggle both the children and still be at work, which sometimes is an impossibility. Our increase for news. We have a bigger appetite for news. And what does that mean for our community?
Well, I think we've been in the news a lot these last few months. And if we didn't see an increase in news, that would worry me about all of y'all. But we have seen this increase in news, and it does show that we are very much interested in the fate of the United States, and it shows up in our viewing habits.
We're at our 30 minutes here, and I want to ask, and clearly in the news, Nielsen's been a partner of ours for the time that you've been there. I am concerned that you guys are making the news, and there's news. And I know that there have been moments as African executives have found themselves in the position that you're in, wanting to double down, wanting to be able to have increased budgets, wanting to be able to have communication, you've made the news. And there is clearly news out there. I'd like to ask, and it's just a yes or no. Is it possible for a Cheryl Grace to be herself and to be able to be respected in a place like Nielsen at this moment in time as we find ourselves in history?
I certainly hope so. Thank you for asking.
All right. Well, you know that we respect what you are to our community. We know that you have wanted to always do more for our community. So I hope that Nielsen sees and knows that we want and expect more as it relates to someone who, for the past 16 years, has served this community and has been an advocate for all of us Black owned media. We know that when there are changes that haven't been positive, that even our support is often. So to Nielsen and to all those out there, let's figure out how to make this work. We respect you. You have always been a very candid and clear communicator, but you've been committed to this Black community like very few others, particularly Black executives. So we thank you for all that you've given. So let's hopefully you and Nielsen can get this to be on the right track.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Peace.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, hopefully you found that this is empowering. We want to thank Cheryl Grace for all that she continues to do to move our community forward. And we want to encourage all of us, including Nielsen, to understand that change is necessary, and supporting change and dialogue means that you'll understand that the movement and the individuals who served you for years are part of that at the seat at the table. So we want to feel like we're in a seat at the table and know that we are a seat at the table from top to bottom. I'm Munson Steed, and you've been watching with Cheryl Grace, the phenomenal Nielsen executive. We love you. Take care.